Brahma, I wanted to start with you. You know that it's very interesting. I reeled out some of your statistics, so I'm sorry if I stole some of your fire. But you know, when we talk about China, and we'll come to the LAC and the military expansionism, but what is a real surprise is this trade war. You know, it's financial power over the rest of the world, and you've been writing quite prolifically about that. Can you first spell out, you know, the scale of this financial threat of China? And you know, they believe in winning without fighting. How do we combat that? Is India doing enough to combat that, or are we contributing to their dominance over us?
Win without fighting is the motto of the Chinese strategy. They have changed the entire geopolitical map of the South China Sea without firing a single shot. They have re-engineered the flows of international rivers like the Mekong without firing a shot. They encroached on large tracts of Indian territory in Ladakh without firing a single shot. They took us by complete surprise. So their strategy has always been to avoid direct combat, to achieve their objectives below the threshold of armed conflict. They are just the opposite of Russia. You know,
can all of you hear him at the back? Okay.
The Russians tend to have this massive, full-fledged invasion. They did that in Crimea in 2014, and then more recently in Ukraine a year ago, in February last year, full-fledged aggression. That's not the Chinese approach. The Chinese have learned from their disastrous invasion of Vietnam in 1979 to achieve their objectives, strategic, geopolitical, and economic, without engaging in combat. So they have done enormous expansionism that we have seen in Asia and beyond, even in the South Pacific, without firing a single shot.
So the question I want to ask you there is, you know, you've kind of laid that out, just how big this operation and ambition of theirs is. But I used, and I said I stole your fire by giving away that one statistic that India over the last year has, you know, our trade surplus with China has gone up by 50% to 100 billion, and we contribute 11% to their trade surplus, which is they can't decouple from China. You know, help us understand our strategy on this.
Well, you have asked a question that all of us should be asking, and I'm surprised that we don't have this question debated in the country. Why is it that since the Chinese aggression began in April 2020, when they caught us napping by encroaching on certain key Ladakh borderlands, we have seen the Chinese trade surplus with India rise dramatically? In other words, we have allowed China to reap rewards of aggression. How do we allow that? I can understand that, you know, we cannot cut essential imports from China. We depend on them, for example, for pharmaceutical ingredients to manufacture pharmaceuticals. We can't cut off supplies from China. We can't cut off supplies of chips from China. These are all critical to our manufacturing. But non-essential imports. Why are we allowing our markets to be flooded with cheap, substandard goods? Why have we allowed our small and medium-scale manufacturing to get killed? Why are we doing that? Why are we harming our economic interests and rewarding China? I have been raising this question for a long time. I don't get an answer from anybody.
That's, you know, that kind of leaves me gobsmacked, because I was hoping we were going to get an answer from you.
The truth is that the import lobbies in India are major financiers of political parties. You don't say that openly, but that's the truth. That import lobbies in India are very strong. They have a lot of financial muscle. They finance all major political parties. And that's also one reason why, unlike the other Asian economies, India is not an export-driven economy. India is an import-dependent economy. Import-dependent economy that actually relies on domestic consumption for economic growth. The only other major economy in the world that is like India is the United States, which, like India, relies on domestic consumption for growth. But we have not sought to, for example, to build the manufacturing base to become a manufacturing powerhouse, how do we give employment to all these teeming millions of youths in India? They can't be absorbed in agriculture. They can only be absorbed in manufacturing. And manufacturing means you have to allow small and medium-scale manufacturing to flourish, not to die. And that requires India to pursue a long-term economic policy which seeks to aid manufacturing, which seeks to take advantage of the fact that India has comparatively lower labor costs, and the fact that today Western companies are seeking to slowly shift production out of China. So this is India's moment of opportunity, and the demographics are on India's side.
So I'll just come back to you. I just want to bring in Mr. Ranade. As I said that your CV is very exciting. If there are few people who can understand what the Chinese mind thinks, it would be you. So, I just want to lay out the threat before we can begin to see what is it that India should be doing. So we spoke of this trade and financial strength, and we know about the Belt and Road Initiative, the way it's, been lending to Sri Lanka and Pakistan and all of that. So if you move away from that a little bit and look at the other pillars of threat, the military, the cybersecurity, the technological, you've written a book on water. Help us understand where's China placed militarily and technologically.
Getting into our innards, if I may say, science and technology and environment. So these are the range of threats that we have. But as you said, on the military part, our entire 4,057 kilometer LAC is today live. And they have retained for themselves the option of where they are going to do what. But here I would say that I think now we have reached a point where they are not going to be able to push any further in terms of ingress. And there is thinking going on that we need to retaliate. How to do it without pushing the, pushing things over the edge is what we are looking at. The second thing is China itself seems to be preparing not for a hot war or a hot conflict, but just 3 weeks ago, we saw some tender notices where they have asked companies, their own companies of course, to manufacture clubs with barbed wire and stuff and given specifications. So obviously they're getting ready for Galwan type clashes rather than shooting war. But that's something obviously we will take care of. And I think we are at a point today where things can go either way. The second is on cyber. I think here we are underprepared. America is going to have a tough time because the person who is going to launch a cyber attack, he retains the element of surprise. There is also no way in which you can prove 100% as to where the cyber attack originated. So Chinese have that little thing. But just to give you an idea of the scale, they've got 80,000 people who are working on cyber attacks on India and the Dalai Lama setup across the world. So what they're doing is they're surveilling our computers in government offices, in scientific institutes, etc., and then deciding where to attack.
Would you say that the Bombay, when the lights, Mumbai, when the lights failed?
Oh, certainly. Not only that, the recent attack on the hospitals. A number of our politicians go to hospitals, and getting their the details, the health details, is important for them. That's one part. The second is they could also cripple the hospital's functioning by destroying all the data, by disrupting the networks. They've also, incidentally, stopped trains. So, there is a lot of damage that they can do. Apart from the fact, Brahma came close to it, he didn't touch on it, but when he was talking about the power or the muscle of Indian industry or the so-called industry, he didn't talk about Huawei and ZTE.
You said so-called industry, that's making me smile,
Well, I mean, industry...
Are you referring to recent developments?
No, not only that, but industry believes a lot in investment for the future. And looking ahead, I don't know how many of our companies really do it, even the big ones.
So just before you open up new doors, I wanted to pin you down on a couple of things. One, you said that we should push back, and that there are ways to make them stop ingressing. Again, by media reports, we've lost 26 patrolling points out of 65 that we had. There's been a huge occupation of Indian land, though we are not exactly saying that in public life. But you would know that, But when you're saying that India can push back, what form can that take? Are you suggesting conventional attack, or, what is the form of pushback that India can do?
I think there are two things that we can do straight away. Firstly, I think that the policy that we've followed so far has been good. We have not escalated the situation beyond a point, but we have made it very clear that the relationship will not be normal. That's one. But I don't think that's enough. I think the second, before the Chinese do something else, and they've done, now there are two major incidents that have happened. Things are going to happen this year, I anticipate. We will probably, or what we should be doing, is if they come in at a certain point, we can hit elsewhere where they're vulnerable. There are points like that. I think our army has already worked out where they are. And I think that is the kind of response that we need to do. It will still be below the threshold of war. The second thing, which I feel is crucial and which we haven't done, is you were talking about trade. It has jumped from 70 billion in 2020 April to slightly over 100 billion now. That's after the April incursion that happened. The bulk of this trade are small goods, like, idols, lampshades, bulbs, etc.
Toys.
Yeah. I don't see why we can't impose some prohibitive duties on their imports or ban them altogether. Because these are small traders who go there, do the purchases in bulk and come back. By doing this, by putting these bans, you will be tackling your unemployment problem also, because all the small-scale industries that have closed down, which employed 4, 5 people, 10 people, they'll be revived. So I think that's something that we should do. I don't know why we're not doing it, though there is a momentum that is building up, asking people to stop that.
Right. So just, before I come back to Brahma, that I want to ask you, because you've been part of the intelligence network, that would you accept that it's been a huge intelligence failure, that there can be incursions like this? And for lay people like us, it's hard to understand in an era when you have satellites and you have the Chinese balloon floating over America, with all that we say we possess, how can an incursion happen without our knowledge? In this day and age, how can any incursion happen without another country's knowledge?
I'm not being facetious now when I say that it's a very convenient stick, to beat the intelligence setup with. There are 3, 4 factors here which you've got to remember. One is that even if you do collect the intelligence and you know what's happening, and as you said, with satellites in the sky and other things, and electronic eavesdropping, it's not something that is, that is not going to happen. I mean, you are going to know. But a lot depends on people who receive it, how they analyze it, and how they decide to respond. So I'll leave it at that, but let me just say that I doubt if all the satellites failed, if all the electronic eavesdropping devices failed. So I leave it at that now.
Okay. Again, we have an appetite for spicy stories. So tell me, is it really difficult to gather intelligence on China? Is there language difficulty? There are restrictions of travel? When you were there in whatever avatar you were in, can you help us understand, is it more difficult to gather intelligence on China than, say, Pakistan? What are the difficulties that you face, and are we good at it?
It's very difficult. There are 2 things. One is the Chinese system and the Chinese nature. They're a homogeneous society, by and large, at least the Han Chinese. The second is the state controls. They do not allow the Chinese citizen to interact with foreigners. So even if you happen to befriend a Chinese with great difficulty, to meet him is an exercise in itself. It takes an hour and a half to 2 hours of going around the city and then trying to meet him. It's very tough. You're under watch. Your house is bugged. All the houses of diplomats are under watch. You are under watch when you go out. So it's very tough, but it's not that it can't be done, and it's not that it's not being done, but it is very tough. Much easier to operate in other countries like Bangladesh or, wherever.
So on a scale of 10, where would you put our intelligence apparatus on China?
That's a difficult question. I've been out of the game now for a little while.
And you've become a safe artist in the meantime. Okay, I'm going to let you off on that. I want to come back to some of the things that we don't discuss, which, we were chatting over dinner yesterday, and you were saying the Dalai Lama, the water issue, these are perhaps even more dangerous than what we do discuss, which is conventional war and stuff. So I'm going to come back to that. Brahma, I wanted to bring you in that, Michael Pillsbury, who was the advisor for President Trump, he wrote a book called The 100-Year Marathon, where he said that America had pretty much underwritten the rise of China, and that they'd been duped into enabling China on technology, education, trade, everything. So, now again, when there's a talk of decoupling, is America doing enough? I'm going to come to what India should do, but is in terms of geostrategic partnerships, in terms of decoupling, is America doing enough to take on China, and where does India play in their scheme of things?
To provide some historical context, China's rise owes a lot to the United States. It's from Richard Nixon to Barack Obama, successive US presidents aided China's economic rise. It was President Trump who made a paradigm shift in American policy by treating China as a competitor and as an adversary. Then comes Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden has not reversed Trump's China policy, but without reversing that policy, Biden has sought to pursue a more conciliatory approach toward China. Now, unfortunately for him, China's actions every now and then, the latest spy balloon being the latest example, that China acts recklessly and inflames passions in America. The latest spy balloon incident is being portrayed by the critics of Joe Biden as a clear sign of his weakness. The fact is that a balloon traverses across the United States, and that's an action on the part of the Xi Jinping regime that is counterproductive to Chinese interests, because it awakens Americans to the big threat that America faces. The big threat that America faces is not a declining Russia, right? A declining Russia does not pose the prime threat to the United States. Yet the Biden administration is focused on containing Russia, on weakening Russia, as they put it, by entrapping Russia in a military quagmire in Ukraine. And that strategy is leading to depletion of American weapons arsenals at a time when the prime threat from China is rising. So many in Washington now are beginning to, you didn't hear this a few months ago or even 2 months ago, only now from this year, that its strategy of prolonging the Ukraine war by supplying increasingly sophisticated and longer range weapon systems to Ukraine is actually inimical to America's own long-term interests, because America's prime threat comes from China. And the spy balloon incident clearly demonstrates to the Americans, to the general American public, that China is the threat.
So we've kind of established the scale. We could go on all night about establishing other ways that China is threatening us. I just wanted to share a little detail with you. There's Nicholas Chalin, who was the chief software officer of the Pentagon, who resigned 2 years ago, saying that in the technological AI war between America and China, that America's lost the war. He said it's a done deal. In the next 15, 20 years, America cannot take on China, and I'm not going to watch that process, because America's so behind. And that's someone from within the Pentagon saying it. So, we could keep establishing how dangerous China has become. In Taiwan, elsewhere, the line I'm pursuing now is that what is it that countries can do, So what is it that America should be doing? And you've established it's not doing enough, but what is it that it should be doing?
Well, artificial intelligence. How has China come up as a leader in artificial intelligence? 1/5 of the investments that have gone into Chinese artificial intelligence in the last 6 years have come from the United States. And it's just not capital transfers, it's the transfer of valuable know-how. So we are seeing time and again in every sector in China how American companies have aided China's economic rise, technological rise. In fact, the Wall Street remains China's biggest ally. So cutting those links, slowing the transfer of key technologies to China has to be part of the strategy. And the Biden administration finally seems to be waking up to that realization, because recently we have seen the Biden administration impose restrictions on the transfer of advanced chips to China. And according to American media reports, it's also working on prohibiting transfer of sensitive technologies to key sectors in China. That announcement or the declaration or policy guidance hasn't come, but it's supposed to be coming in the coming weeks or months. That indicates that the US is finally seeking to do what it should have been doing years ago, but it compounds the challenges for countries like India, because India is not transferring valuable know-how to China. The US is doing it, and therefore, for India's own security, the US has to do what's in American interest. And what's in American interest is also in India's interest,
Right.
in terms of dealing with China.
So-
and pushing Russia toward China, as US policy is doing through the Ukraine war, is again counterproductive to Indian interests. Because if you force Moscow to pivot to Beijing, you are compounding India's security dilemmas. So India needs American help in order to address India's own security dilemmas.
So I'm going to, just leave a question for you before, which is that, so we have a lot of our military equipment coming from Russia. Russia now has an unlimited, they've said it's a partnership without limits with China. Both of them have interests in Pakistan. So actually, we are really dependent on a country that is very close to two of our greatest adversaries. And so, I wanted to understand what India is doing about, maneuvering out of this kind of geostrategic bind that it's in. And I'm going to come back to you on that. But I wanted to pull you in, on these two very interesting aspects that you threw, which is the threat of water and the Dalai Lama becoming a flashpoint, and how should India handle that? China's sitting on all our water fountains, both in Tibet and in the west, and through the Brahmaputra in the east, the entire Gangetic Plain. We're extremely vulnerable to China. What is your reading on that? Is India aware, and what are we doing about it? What should we do about it?
I think we were slow in reacting, in the sense we had the information as to what they were planning to do. We had it since about late 1980s. And they had unveiled the plans of what they're going to do, how they're going to go about it. What was not clear was specific engineering technology that they're going to use to divert the Brahmaputra and move it to the north. But they have now come out, said that they are going to do it. Whether it's through what they call a minor nuclear explosion in the Great Bend, or whether it is through a series of dams is yet to be seen. But they're building about a total of 17 dams, so-called run-of-the-river dams. But each run-of-the-river dam is going to reduce the water flow. So where is the Brahmaputra going to be is the big question. It's going to affect us. It's going to affect Bangladesh too. The other thing is the immense amount of infrastructure work that is going on in Tibet. You probably know that each airfield, the area around the airfield registers, a functional airfield, registers a 1 degree rise in temperature. Now they've got 8 airfields functioning in Tibet. They are building more roadways, expressways rather. They've set up 2 railway lines to transport troops. Apart from that, they're bringing in a lot of Hans in there as labor. Now the temperatures in Tibet are going to rise. Chinese scientists or climatologists have said that there is a 3-degree rise in temperature that they anticipate by the end of next year, in which case the glaciers will retreat. The main tributaries that come and feed the Ganges and the Indus are going to be affected. So for us, it is a major problem. And the Indo-Gangetic belt, which is where these rivers come, is where the bulk of the Indian population is. We face a problem not only there, but if water is reduced, supply of water is reduced to Bangladesh, then we will see a flood of people coming from there. If that happens in Pakistan, we'll have again a problem with people coming in here. So we've got very serious problems on water.
You know, what is your solution? We're going to run out of time and there's so much more to discuss, but what is your solution? You were saying that India should internationalize our water problems with China. Does the government, previous governments, this government, the security establishment, are they with you on that? Is it a dangerous game to play? Because then you might internationalize Kashmir as well. So what is it that India should do? I mean, geographically, we are so vulnerable to China.
I don't think we should, firstly, I don't think we should have a defensive mindset. The second thing is, how does Kashmir get linked with it? I would have understood if you'd said Farakka, but Farakka is already an issue between Bangladesh and us. I think we must raise the Brahmaputra issue, point out or out China for human rights, etc. After all, today we are at a situation where they've actually come into our territory, where we are asking them to restore the status quo as on April 2020. So that is very clear. So I don't think we need to be defensive. And there are going to be other problems coming up. You alluded to the Dalai Lama. That's a serious issue too. Which
Can you just say that in a nutshell? Because I'm always greedy to put in as many thought, seeds as possible.
As and when the this Dalai Lama passes from the scene, that's the 14th Dalai Lama, there'll be, as he has said, either a reincarnation or an emanation. The emanation is when he picks an elder person and says that is my emanation, and that cuts out the period of high vulnerability when the child is growing. Reincarnation will be a problem. But if, let us say, hypothetically, that he is reincarnated in Tawang, then the Chinese are going to go ballistic. They are going to make all kinds of demands on us. And I think, by and large, our position should be very clear. What the Tibetans want is what we should do. We don't believe in interfering in religion. So the Tibetans will obviously go with whoever the Dalai Lama has decided, and that's the Dalai Lama we should decide.
Right.
So there is going to be a problem there.
So, I'm just going to pose 2 more questions before I take up because we are running out of time. One is that, we have now positioned China as this fire-breathing dragon, but you have a very interesting perspective where you say that there are a lot of troubles within China that actually could be its own downfall. And I'd like you to literally bullet shot that out because we are running out of time. While you're just thinking that through, I want to bring you in, Brahma, on the strategic question I asked you, that, in the way Asia is reorganizing itself, is India making the correct alliances? Which are the interesting ones that you think we are doing? And what are the ones we should do?
Well, first, alliances provide value only up to an extent. At the end of the day, you have to be capable of defending peace.
If you just talk to them, I'm going to quickly look at the questions.
That is the key to India's security, India's own capabilities. The interesting thing about India is that India can send a spacecraft to the Mars. India is a space power, a missile power. Where India cannot import, India has excelled in those areas. But in conventional arms, from guns to name anything, we are highly import dependent. Why? Why are we import dependent? The answer is very simple: corruption. Where imports are possible, we have allowed our capabilities to remain weak. Where no country will sell you anything, India excels. How can a country become a global power with this kind of mindset, with this kind of approach, where we are not able to manufacture basic armaments. Of course, we are seeing efforts now to correct that. We are seeing this focus on domestic defense equipment manufacturing. And I'm glad that some corrective steps are being taken. But it's very important, as Mao said, and Mao committed the worst genocide in history, bigger than Holocaust under Hitler, the great disaster that killed, by conservative estimates, 45 million Chinese. But he said one thing that we should always keep in mind, that the first test that any country has to pass on the way to becoming a major power is to be able to defend itself with its own capabilities. That's the test India must pass in order to become a global power.
Right. There are just so many aspects, and I'm going to actually ask you all if you want 5 more minutes of this session, or we should bring an abrupt halt. Those of you who want some more, can you raise your hands? Oh, okay, that's quite a majority. So I'm going to risk taking 5 minutes more, and do stay for Karan's session because he's fantastic. So Jaidev, I asked you that question, that what is the implosion within China? And there are a lot of people asking that here as well, that their illiberalism, I'm not going to many people are asking that, is there scope that there could be a dethroning of Xi within China, revolt within China? What are the challenges it's facing within?
Firstly, I'd just like to say, without answering your question directly, but I'll come to that, is that the Chinese are not infallible. I mean, there is a myth that has been built up, that the Chinese the rise is inexorable, etc. We are seeing it now stumble. The second thing is that the Chinese are obsessed with their security. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party has to survive, that is their obsession. And that is also a weakness. During Tiananmen, I was there incidentally, and particularly at the nights, the leadership was in chaos. They were frightened, they were worried, and later on, of course, they accused Chao Tse-yang, etc., of being a counter-revolutionary rebellion. But they were obsessed with security. Now, when you see, since 2015, the security budget going up, and today it's about $70 billion more than their national defense budget, it indicates the worry that they have. The worry which we are seeing today because of the slowdown in the economy. It's about 3%, 2.9 correctly, instead of having been 5.5 which they wanted. There is massive unemployment. Graduate unemployment is at 32%. People are not getting jobs. I mean, I can go on and on. But while Xi Jinping has strengthened his position, he's put his loyalists in place, but he realizes that if people get together, if there is a rash of protests, it will be difficult to control. And that is what they are worried about, but that is also their weakness, because at the same time, they haven't been able to settle the ethnic minorities, either Mongolia or Xinjiang or Tibet, which makes up more than half of China, just in land area. And he is still barreling hard on the ethnic minorities. He reduced their representation by 10%. The third and final point is, I think that in itself is a weakness of theirs. This story that they built up, that they're invincible, that they're going to take over the Asia-Pacific region, etc. Well, we blocked them at Doklam. We blocked them now. And I think if we do retaliate or take some offensive action, I'm not talking about a big action, it'll puncture the balloon. Much as what Vietnam did in 1979. And it'll take them a long time to recover. It'll certainly put Xi Jinping in the spot. So I think, it's not game over. There is still a lot that can happen. And let's see. After all, Xi Jinping made a mistake at the last party congress when he threw a challenge to the Americans. And we saw what Trump did.
I'm going to call out a few questions, and then both of you just pick one each or two each that you would like to do. In that, you didn't mention the demographic slowdown in China, and I thought it'd be interesting for us because we are always bemoaning the numbers that we have here. But China lost 860 million people, and that its demography is going down. I believe in the next 5-10 years, 1/3 of their population will be above 60. The economy is down to 1.3 to 3%. So, you were saying that I don't know if you mentioned it, that there's been a 30% salary cut of the party. So there's a lot
Bonuses are being withdrawn.
Sorry?
Bonuses are being withdrawn.
Bonuses have been withdrawn, that were given have been withdrawn. And you made a very interesting point, which is that you said if America sanctions China and stops Chinese students from going abroad, that might be the trigger for the Communist Party to revolt because all their children are studying abroad. Is that intelligence or is that just surmise?
Well, it's 80% of the director level people of the Chinese Communist Party have their children studying in either the US, UK, Australia or Canada. So that's a large number. And that translates, if you do the math, to 300 million people either belonging to the Chinese Communist Party, present, retired or dependent directly. Now, if those people are unhappy, they're going to turn the pressure on to Xi Jinping.
Right.
Because they'll say that our relationship with America, which is a very treasured relationship for the Chinese, has been ruined, and you've done it, and you better step down because the party is now in trouble.
Right. I'm so sorry, we are really going to run out of time, and I'm afraid you might all suddenly want dinner and bed. So I'm just going to call out a couple of questions. And none of your names are here, so I'm not being able to call that out. There's a question that is bio-war real? And if yes, is the threat to the world only from China or elsewhere? Is India vigilant enough? Will China invade Taiwan and establish its hegemony? There are questions about, is Chinese hand in the ongoing Adani saga? That's one you should take. Do we have a foreign hand going on in China?
Well, we can always try.
Okay. And then there are more questions about, sorry. Yeah, this is a good question to Brahma. What is the proportion of our current trade surplus imports from China that are non-essential, in your view? And there are more questions about dethroning within. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave it at that. Will you take the bio-warfare question? And will you take the question on what is the component of essential goods that India has? So, want to go first?
The Chinese are working on bio-warfare. In fact, they've stepped up their research, military-related research on bio-warfare. They're also working on new technologies in biological warfare where they can target certain races. So they're working on, manipulating the virus to attack certain ethnic groups. I don't know how far they've progressed. I don't know where they are, but they are working on it, and that we know. So it's something we got to be careful about.
Right.
Well, according to one study, about 45% of India's imports from China are non-essential, but it really centers on how you define non-essential or essential items. On Taiwan, the Chinese aggression will not be a full-fledged aggression. Biden was asked last September, will the US defend Taiwan if the Chinese were to attack? He said, yes, if there was an unprecedented attack, but there won't be an unprecedented attack. What China will do is to launch a slow squeeze of Taiwan. Chinese approach is incremental, step by step. At what point will the US respond to a slow squeeze of Taiwan? We saw last August when the Chinese conducted their exercises around Taiwan, how they're going to throttle Taiwan. They're going to blockade Taiwan, both air blockade and a sea blockade. So at what point will the Americans feel they have to intervene to defend Taiwan will be the critical issue that will decide Taiwan's fate. On the issue of demographics, it's very important. Why is Xi Jinping in a hurry to achieve what he calls the Chinese dream? The Chinese dream being China emerging as the world's #1 power, supplanting the United States. Believing that China has a narrow window of strategic opportunity before China confronts a demographic crisis, stalled economic growth, an unfavorable international climate, Xi Jinping has been increasingly taking risks. The fact is that China is already facing long-term structural constraints to emerging as a preeminent power. Just take one issue. It's demographic crisis. Last year, deaths outnumber births in China, which shows that not only is China's population shrinking, it's rapidly aging. Today, India's average age is 28.4, making India one of the world's youngest countries. In 2050, India's mean age will be 36 only. But what will be China's? 53. 53. It'll be a very aging society. In other words, demographics alone show that China cannot remain the world's factory floor. That's the reason why India has to seize the opportunity to emerge as a manufacturing powerhouse. Only then can India emerge as a world power. It's very important for India to go from services-led economic growth to becoming a manufacturing powerhouse that utilizes the current opportunities to make that transformation.
Right.
Can I just make one comment on demography?
Yes.
The Chinese are trying very hard to try and get people to get married, to produce children. But I think Chinese mothers are very concerned. Kids are not getting married.
Right. So, talking about Ekta's serials that celebrate the institution of marriage, on demography, on digitization, particularly on democracy, India has a march over China. Over dinner, we didn't get to touch all this, but Mr. Ranade was saying, at least in the realm of conventional war, we're in a good state, and China feels that we have enough deterrence. But there are many, many other aspects of this. I'm just going to leave it for after, when we are having a drink after our sessions. Both of them are available, and you'll be able to speak about it. One thing which intrigues me is that at a time when we're talking about decoupling with China, we've had, I hope these are just the seeds of thought that we can continue a discussion on. Thank you very much, Mr. Chellaney. Thank you, Mr. Ranade. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll take it afterwards. And now we're going to enter into that session which I told you to shield yourselves against, actually, which is that Karan Singh Karan Singh, he calls himself Karan Singh Magic, but he's a very intriguing man because after he's dropped our jaws, and as I said,